Okay then, that was a extraordinarily fast queue, as you can see. Interesting. Anyhow, hello to all. I'm here today with the Tier 10 German aircraft carrier, the Manfred von Richtofen. I have been instructed to commission the Manfred, a ship I ordinarily otherwise had no interest in playing due to its relatively overtuned state. We're here today in a tier 8 and 10 match of two carriers, which should be interesting, to say the least. Montana, Yamato, Izumo, Musashi, Massachusetts, so no particularly potent citadels whatsoever. Or no particularly potent AA, rather, whatsoever, and plenty of citadels to go forth with. Now, the Manfred's been out for a bit, and there are, well, some mixed opinions about its overall performance, although I believe most people are quite aware of its relatively devastating characteristics. Starting out with the AP rockets, just using them to scout, you can see this 9-plane 3x3 setup with the 3100 Alpha rocket, which should be quite potent here. Now, I don't have too much in the way of targets of cruisers. All three should be somewhat citadelable, although I would not recommend trying it against the Agir. Now normally you can actually do some pretty good anti-carrier duty with these rockets. There's only one destroyer in the match, by the way. They have a Shimakaze. Ooh, okay, so there's a tier 8 cruiser here, so see if he turns. I also find the Shimakaze on the way. Okay. Like all Germans, they have that extended out reticle. He doesn't turn quite enough, so I do dome him for quite a bit, but you can see that fragile nature of the planes. I'm going to turn out away from that Massachusetts AA, however, and even with these fragile tier 10 rocket planes, still have enough distance to maneuver quite a bit. Heavy flak, but still going to chuck those rockets in for an extra 3k, and 11,000 unhealable damage onto that Talonin is going to be real fun. Anyhow, this is one of the competitive carriers of choice in the past, the competitive carriers in clan battles or clan wars or Kings of the Sea, or even just ranked battles, would have been the Hakuryu, but the Hakuryu has been somewhat supplanted in that role by the MVR, the Manfred von Richtofen, for its specialized anti-heavy armor role, as well as the Steel Reward Midway class carrier, FDR, or the Roosevelt. Here launching the torpedo bombers, still sharing that triple torpedo loadout, slamming that Shimakaze with 2 torpedoes and getting myself a quick reset. Not at a good angle. I was considering hitting that Talonin, but I think I'm going to hit this Massachusetts instead. You can see still that low damage torpedo. 2 hits and a flood again on the Massachusetts, which is interesting because these are supposed to be so-called low flood chance torpedoes. Looking for some nice slim targets. Now the whole thing with German carriers, including this tier 10, is that they have relatively low health planes. So you can see this 12 plane squadron has only about 23,000 health. So if you do a bit of quick division with this 3x4 setup and 12 planes, you can see that each plane has less than 1200 health, which is obviously not great. They do, however, carry a very heavy bomb. Each plane carries one. I assume this is either a 1,000 pound, a 1250, or a 1,500 pound bomb, and it has a 8,800 damage alpha. So if you recall the former Hakuryu alpha of, I think it was 8,500, I kind of forgotten at this point. To get that 255, well, this is even greater. Just giving some flak here against this Izumo. You can see that high altitude performance. I'm gonna pop my heal here just because I wanted to avoid doing anything too dramatic. But the bombs are extremely high penetration. They are less accurate than the Hakuryu's bombs, both because of the altitude of release and just because of the raw dispersion formula, and they have that standard reset time, but against a isolated target like this Izumo, should be able to quite easily make mincemeat of him. Getting 3 drops off, I'm assuming. Oh, okay, I ricochet the bombs onto the turrets, and I get a non-penetration glancing off the side of the hull. So sadly for me, Gonna bungle my second drop a bit. But you can see they have a rather quick narrowing ellipse. That does require some lead time because of the increased altitude of the drop. 2 quick citadels there for some free damage, more or less. I know the Shimakaze is not touching my detection. This is a MVR hull with a concealment expert, so 12.2 and no module. Screening for him with my torpedo bombers, which launched that low damage German torpedo of 4500 Alpha. Tells me he's about at the last known. Gonna abort this drop here since the Shimakaze has no AA. Both metaphorically because, well, his AA is kind of crap, and also literally because he has his AA turned off. Now, most German planes have pretty good handling. The torpedo bombers are no exception, and more importantly, they arm extremely rapidly. So you can see me prepping that drop there. On the way in, enemy MVR dropping a fighter. Actually, that's the Kaga. Now, I could actually have gone after the Kaga in some kind of carrier snipe shenanigans, I'm pretty sure. But we're gonna decline to do that in this particular match because, well, he's just too far away and it's much more efficient to attack this bow in Yamato. Not actually sure this guy's here. Diving through, popping a heel. Selectively going after targets with lesser AA and no healing capacity, getting some nice hits onto that Yamato. You can see that this reticle has relatively short-range torpedoes that also narrow in terms of spread quite rapidly. 19 out of 20 bombers still. I don't know what my carrier hull is doing, so we're just gonna glide behind this rock here. Now, like all tier 10 carriers, the MVR has an armored flight deck, but it's only 50 millimeters, so it's really just a modified tier 9 battleship hull, the Frederic de Groza hull. Okay, they're dropping multiple fighters, which is not favorable. I'm moving quite close, but I'm just going to operate from behind this mountain. Montana and Musashi. Musashi has basically no AA, but it's actually easier to go after this Agir, I think. German ships tend to be quite poor in the vertical protection department, so I would imagine it's going to be quite simple. You never know, though. Can't actually see my drop, but you can see that triple citadel basically annihilates him as I deal 20,000 damage to him for basically free. Because reasons. You can also see that the MBR has heal on her dive bombers, so it's just an extra thing, which compensates for that low HP. Just trying to land one bomb here, so waiting for the reticle to kind of get perfectly matched, and then I'm gonna eviscerate this guy, quickly removing him from existence. Kind of showing off with that triple sit there why the MVR has supplanted the Hakuryu. Not only did the Hakuryu get that nerf to her AP dive bomber alpha, well, but the MVR has even more alpha and can do absolutely bonkers damage and has even more penetrative power to punch through vertical protection. So when you have vertical protection like a German cruiser or battleship, which is relatively poor, or say a Petropavlovsk or Moskva or Stalingrad, staples of the competitive scene right now, the specialized anti-armor capacity is quite desirable, using those fast but short-ranged German torpedoes to kind of zone out that Montana. Now my other squadrons are available. I could just go for dive bombers. That would be the conventional squadron of choice. I'm gonna just use my speed here to defend this Yamato since he's so clearly under assault and he's just on the way anyway. So no thanks, but no thanks, Kaga guy. You can go bug off and lose some planes. Kaga doesn't really care. Now the rockets are typically seen as anti-cruiser weapons, but they actually are quite serviceable anti-battleship weapons. The MVR rockets in particular finally have enough alpha where just penetration damage will allow them to deal about 1,000 damage each, so you can see me doing that 7,000 damage rocket break there. Not sure I'm going to be able to get this strike off onto this Massachusetts. I don't have blast gas on this captain yet, so... Okay, my rockets go a bit high, but 1600 is fine. Gonna just beach myself over here. Relaunching with these dive bombers onto this enemy Yamato. Probing up over, enemy Yamato has launched his fighter. But with this about 25,000 alpha, I should be able to deliver a punishing strike, irregardless of what he does. You can see the reticle's quite large. If you aim a little too far back, you will get a non-citadeling hit, like so. Sorry about that in the background. That's quite alright. Even though her dive bombers have a heal, the torpedo bombers, like all other high-tier torpedo bombers, also have the heal, so can punch through quite a bit of thick AA, punching through the Massachusetts and Talonin here with low HP, fast German planes, scoring my Confederato, or Confederate. Now they are encroaching on my airspace, or rather than airspace, my hull space. You can see that short arming distance of these German torpedo bombers is going to allow me to punch him again. And at this point, I am going to reverse and rudder out. Do break that engine, so that should buy me some time. MBR attacking me, which is something you can do with the MBR. It's actually a fairly proficient carrier sniper. However, I have a German turtleback, so you can't actually MBR snipe another MBR with itself, which is kind of ironic. Jamming down the air brake here, need to make sure those citadels land in the right spot, and indeed I will get those. Next target is going to be the Talonin, because he has torpedoes. He has a quad per side, to be specific. He's pretty close here, so I'm going to have to circle with my planes. He's going to rush at me. He's dodging against these Shokaku torpedoes. Not sure which way he's going to dodge, outward apparently. I have a 50mm deck armor, but that's not to say that he's going to stop this Talonin from kind of ripping me up. My allies here have kind of abandoned me somewhat, so I'll have to fend to my own devices. Going after the Talonin with rockets, just like earlier in the match. You can see those Talonin 4km torpedoes stopping just short. Secondaries popping off. And my hull is going to die an ignominious death here, thanks to some relative mistakes. But it's okay, the Talonin is gonna die, I reckon. Sending my last few torpedoes in. 169,000 damage, in spite of having pinned myself in a pretty shit spot. We'll see if the enemy carriers can kind of pin me down, but as far as some pretty casual games with my very useful Kansas ally over here and Holland go, should definitely be an interesting one. Honestly, if I were in the Holland's position, I probably would have just gunned down that Talonin. He doesn't appear to be in gun range, he's actually sailing away, but the Iowa will dispatch him before the enemy carrier inevitably goes after him. The main issue with the enemy team is that they have to go try and attack before the points tick out. Now, my carrier is a tier 8 carrier, a Shokaku with a fairly large citadel, and he's sitting pretty broadside and the MBR is coming for his ass, so if he doesn't angle properly, he's gonna just take it. So 7,000 damage. Now even HE rockets can kill a 7,000 damage carrier, but he's definitely turning in the wrong direction. So this guy is definitely dead. Unless this MBR screws up his approach. Looks like it's quite flat enough. You don't have to be completely flat for the rockets to be potent. But either a pretty bad spread or a kind of misaimed rocket strike means that this MBR just spent his whole time gliding across half the map, since he's in the center over here, to kind of do some negligible damage. Now, another strike will pretty much guarantee the Shokaku's death, but even going down those points from the Shokaku's death after these MVR torpedo bombers inflict the last 3k damage is not going to be a huge deal, relatively speaking. Shokaku doing his best to dodge the torpedoes, but you can see those fast German torpedoes are pretty much undodgeable if you aim properly. Now this guy didn't bother to get a good drop, so he has to do it again. He will get the drop off though because of the speed of those low HP planes, and at this point it's super easy to get that hit off. You can see heavy targets such as a Shokaku. Well, the Shokaku is not heavily armored, it is heavily, well, unmaneuverable, like most quote-unquote heavies in the game as a capital ship, with a almost 1,000-meter turning circle. Enemy is now encroaching on B cap, but we should be able to 1-cap win this with what's left of the health on our ships, and the Holland should be able to provide an amusing amount of torpedo power, and by amusing I mean disgusting, which should dissuade these other ships from pushing in. Now the enemy, I can't even tell what this is anymore. I guess it's a Montana, is pushing B, but the death of this Massachusetts will pretty much guarantee that this game will probably tick out from 1-cap before anything can really be done. Enemy Kaga is probing for this Holland, but the Holland is full HP, the Holland has heals, and has extremely powerful AA, which means it's unlikely to get soloed down by this Kaga. And so this relatively ignominious MVR game is going to end in a victory. Not really a fan of this carrier design. I think it's kind of disgusting, as you saw from the triple sit on that Agir earlier. But I don't really control what goes into the game. I just control what I play inside of it. And if you're going to play in a competitive setting, there's no reason not to play the most powerful ships available to you. Now personally, I found that the Hakuryu's more powerful 9,000 alpha torpedoes are still worth using. And the increased precision of her dive bombing squadron overall, and you saw several kind of wonky misses on that Yamato hull, for example, and Izumo hull. Mean that Hakuryu still has her place, but in the greater grand scheme of things, in a specialized format like clan battles with all these Russian ships crawling around, the MVR really is quite well suited to taking out heavy targets. Now, as you saw though, even minimal maneuvers can kind of get in the way of those MVR dive bombers. They're not nearly as flexible in maneuvering as those of the Hakuryu or Midway. So you do have to play with care. But nevertheless, in spite of my untimely demise, still 169,000 damage. 21 torpedo hits, 16 bomb hits, of which 11, actually not even 11 were citadels. I think it's probably something like 5 or 6, we'll have to check. Were citadels, 8 planes shot down by my hull, and 4 by fighter, 2 incapacitations, 2 actual kills, 4 floods in spite of the supposedly low flood chance, and 36 rocket impacts, along with a couple cheeky secondaries. Don't have any secondary spect, in spite of dying quite early. You can see I'm still quite far up the scoreboard. And the enemy Kaga was quite unsuccessful, being both bottom tier and not very proficient. Damage-wise, you can see the vast majority of my damage coming from bombs after abusing some of the more isolated battleships and, in the Agir's case, cruisers. You can see just 5 bombs basically killed him, and we did get a full triple citadel that got full damage for 25,000 or whatever it is. I think it's actually 26,000-ish. Which is obviously not the most compelling game design in the world. Now module-wise, slots 1 and 2 are pretty much mandatory aircraft modules. You don't take torpedo acceleration, so I do take torpedo speed just to get those nice fast torpedoes, but you don't actually have to. The base torpedo speed, I believe, is already fairly fast. I think it's 50-ish. Might actually be 55 if I'm not mistaken. So some other options I've seen are taking attack plane time, which is actually quite popular. You saw there was a couple of near misses where I had to kind of punch in with the boost. So if you take attack plane modification 1, you get the 2 extra seconds, and that kind of alleviates those issues. So we can try that. In terms of health, you saw those dive bombers kind of have to get right over the target because they're those high altitude dive bombers. So since they have, even though they have that heal, they only have a very low hit point pool of about, apparently it's 19,000, and I can't do any math at all. I believe I stated that they had less than 1100 health, but I think I was thinking more of 2,000 health. So each one of them has shy of 2,000 health even with this health module, so that's where I put my slot 4 HP module. Slot 5 flight control. The reserves are not terrible at 14 and 18 without the module, but just like the Hakuryu, I find you don't need the concealment that much, so the 2 extra planes will occasionally matter. Whereas having a kilometer extra concealment is typically not going to matter that much. And then last but not least, because the planes are already fast, I emphasize the speed of the aircraft rather than try and get a percentage-based bonus off of the relatively poor hit point pool. Captain-wise, I am utilizing Gunther Lutyens, but honestly, outside of random battles, he doesn't really do much, although having the improved engine boost is definitely very nice. And Lutyens runs a very standard Hakuryu build, so the modified Hakuryu build after the introduction of the torpedo speed module, which the Hakuryu takes, involves skipping torpedo acceleration. Instead, you go servicing into plane speed into armor and HP. From there, I go into concealment to get a more serviceable concealment. I'm taking site stabilization. A lot of people will take advanced firing training to get those secondaries out to a more respectable range of about 9 point something kilometers. I think it's 9.4 kilometers. But personally, since I'm using this carrier in a clan battles context, I want the most competitive captain possible, and in competitive, if your carrier secondaries are going off, something is very wrong. So I'm just optimizing for a couple fractional seconds of improved aim time. And then I go back for improved engine boost, and my final point will be last gasp. I have an 18-point captain right now, but I am working on training this one up. Anyway, that was just one quick warm-up battle. I haven't played too much in the Manfred. I did spend some time in the training room, so I do generally know what I'm doing, but in terms of actual random battles, I believe that was my 4th battle overall. But as you can see, because of the way the AP dive bombers and pretty much undodgeable versus heavy target torpedoes work, the Manfred von Richtofen is capable of racking up silly amounts of damage in very short periods of time. Now, without access to high explosive rockets or bombs, she does have a marked weakness versus destroyers, but that's true of all German carriers. The torpedoes are actually fairly potent, as you saw, versus that early reset versus the Shimakaze. Because even with a smaller target area and a relatively nimble target, the high speed and short arming distance of the torpedoes means that it's very easy to catch a destroyer in a turn and just yoink him for some damage, which in most cases will be unhealable. You'll have to excuse me if in the background there's a bit of noise. Just getting everything ready for the day in the early morning, which also kind of explains the kind of odd, cute game just now with the double carriers. Hopefully another tier 10 carrier will decide they want to play soon. Don't want this to take too long. But honestly, as I said, don't take too much of this too seriously. I'm going over the very broad strokes of the MVR. As I said, I don't have that much playtime on her yet. So still speaking from a position of relative inexperience. Although, overall I have quite a bit of carrier experience in having played the Percival, which is just MVR with less consistency due to less penetrative power and lower quality aircraft. I have a good grasp of what the ship is capable of doing. Q really is taking a little bit. Hopefully we don't pop into some kind of weird low player count match. Because that would be unfortunate. But mostly in this kind of casual gameplay overview, I'm aiming to obtain some extra experience on the hull. Since, as I said, I have been instructed to attempt to put in some MVR time for this clan battles season. So we will do that, because I am that kind of person. For myself personally, I prefer not to play ships without putting in a good amount of playtime onto them, even if I feel experienced as a player. There's always quirks to individual ships that you kind of have to play through and obtain a massive games to make use of. If you saw in the last battle, even versus those slow, sluggish battleships, there were a couple of flubbed drops which I feel could have been perfectly fine if I timed the arming of the dive bomb attack a little better. So that is my main goal in attaining more practice time on the MVR. This match is going to drop in a minute, regardless of if the matchmaking is good or not, because that is the way VG has their code set up. So we'll see what kind of match we get plopped into. Hopefully it's not too awful. As I said, it is early in the morning, so matchmaking can be a bit wonky and less representative overall of the average World of Warships match, but sadly I am quite busy at this current schedule period, so it is what it is. Well, if this goes on for another minute or so and we can't find another tier 10 carrier who wants to play at this period, I'm probably just going to end it off here for now. I'm sure we'll be able to revisit the MVR should the need arise. But at this time period, I don't have too much time to sit around waiting for a match, so that's just how it's going to be if we can't find a match. It can be somewhat difficult to find a match with another tier 10 carrier at this time period in the day, so that is partially why I started off so surprised in that last match we just played just now. Okay, finally queuing up after 6 minutes. Another tier 10 carrier decided to join the match. Gonna be a bit tight on time. And okay, this is why you don't play at weird hours late in the or early in the morning, because you get matches like this. But we will be able to demonstrate a kind of smaller match. So there's a GK, Yamato, and Petro, so at least we will be able to demonstrate some anti-Petro capabilities. Now, with less ships in the match, I'm less reluctant to push up with that 12-kilometer detection, which is actually quite a bit better than the midway hull's detection. You can push quite aggressively. Now there's only a Petro Pavlovsk, but it can be demonstrated quite easily that even versus relatively thin armor, or relatively thick armor rather, the rockets still deal a fair amount of damage at 3100 alpha, and you're launching 4 of them. Just imagine each plane can deal up to 1000 damage, so you can deal about 9000 damage. And while 9000 damage isn't particularly special, that's honestly not that bad for a lot of impacts against heavy ships. In a lot of cases. There's that MVR behind that Yamato with a stacked Petro Pavlovsk. So since I know I'm unlikely to be able to make multiple hits, just gonna pre-drop here with just scouting really to see if I could get a better idea. Gonna drop a fighter to keep the MVR spotted, the enemy MVR that is. Rigmo reveals himself. And we're just going for superstructure damage here. He's already angled, but I don't really think you can Citadel a Petropavlovsk anyway, and 4k damage is still 4k damage. Gonna protect my Shimakaze and, more importantly, my Colbert. With a fighter, he's very vulnerable to MVR rockets. The Colbert has a raised large citadel and next to no armor. I don't know if that fighter is still there because the MVR and all German fighters have reduced air detectability. Or reduced overall detectability. You can see that short arming distance, by the way. It's turning in, so we're going to follow the turn. Popping one of my 3, not 2, speed boost charges to get a short turn. Excellent turning circle. Now he's planted slightly away, so I'm going to just try and catch him in this turn area here before proceeding further. It looks like no contacts, in spite of those fast torpedoes. Kind of a bit of a difficulty there. I can see that exposed GK dropping a fighter on my Yamato because he's almost certainly going to be attacked. And then I think I'm gonna actually make the dangerous journey across. Now I have a turtle back. I don't know if I mentioned that last time. I think I mentioned it very briefly. Which is gonna protect me from being citadeled, unlike other carriers, but I will still take large chunks from Petropavlovsk or a Yamato. Now GK, as I said, is a German ship. And German ships like that Aguirre that we saw in the last match have a very poor vertical protection. Have to lead ahead. Want the bombs to fall into the midsection. We're dropping from quite high altitude, but you can see the poor dispersion of the bombs means that if you're unlucky and the bombs decide to just go astray, fighter tags, by the way. But he's vulnerable enough that I'm willing to just tank the plane losses, especially in a small match like this. I'm unlikely to expend so many planes that I can't make attacks. And this time the bombs strike the midsection, and I'm able to get some nice citadels and some engine breakage. I'm going to continue to try and protect my Shimakaze, who's going to undoubtedly be spotted by those planes. So, I'm going to drop a fighter. Shimakaze has AA on for some reason, so he's going to get punished by the likes of that Petro. That Petro sitting in a fairly static bow in position. Petro with its 6.6 kilometer long range AA is definitely a thorn in my side, and a thorn in the side of many carrier players. Okay, he's moving forward, so I'm actually going to miss that drop, almost certainly. Don't have the space or the HP to turn around, but thanks to that short arm distance, should be able to just attack the Yamato like so. Not sure if I'm going to get that. You can see that kind of buggy drop that's been going on. As I said, I did miss those Petro torps, and I'm going to miss those Yamato torps too, so that's kind of rough. Didn't quite have enough space, but we're going to go after this bow in Petro, who is attacking my Shimakaze. MVR going for some blind torpedo drops, I think. At least I think he's blind. He might be actually have been briefly radared. So Petro throws up 8 flag puffs and has 6.6 kilometer AA range, so yeah, I don't know what's up with that wargaming, but he's forced to bow in here, so hopefully dispersion notwithstanding, as you can see the dispersion trolling there, I will get some citadels on this guy. Hope flag puff. Probably should make use of the engine cooling here just to get some increased maneuverability. Give him a good amount of lead. And you can see the reticle is not nearly so forgiving as that of the Hakuryu. In this situation over here, just not landing any bombs whatsoever on this barely maneuvering Petropavlovsk because, well, that's just the nature of the MVR. Against targets even slightly smaller than battleships, the reticle is somewhat poor. Shouldn't have dropped that fighter there, to be honest, because I'm still inside of Petro AA range. Kind of just resorting to using torpedoes. He's bowing in toward my heavy Yamato, so he's going to be dispatched. Scoring 2 torps quite easily as my hull gets a solo capture in this wonky game, but that's how it is. There's a Rigmo in that smoke, by the way, but I really don't care. Just gonna dump some torpedoes into this beach GK, avoid as much of the torpedo volume as possible, and we'll be on our merry way. Still a GK and a Yamato left. The enemy MVR is bullying my Yamato, who will probably die. The bombs are very consistent. Duck out of the way of the fighter. And we're gonna harass that beached GK, mainly because he's just an easy target. Popping the heal. We know the GK is reversing, so just gonna drop those there. Only one citadel. I think I dropped a little too far forward. The Yamato is hugging the hull of the enemy MVR, which makes me very reluctant to attack him, which is why I'm avoiding him, by the way. Very intelligent choice. I think he's accelerating now to try to get away from my Colbert. Aimed a little too far forward again, so we're gonna have to adjust that. Currently kind of sitting around with no destroyer. Sadly, my Shimakaze was not the brightest of gentlemen, you might say. So I'm gonna have to go after this Rugmo, but he's gonna smoke, so what can you do? There's a lone Yamato, so I might actually have enough HP to make 2 passes. Gonna drop a fighter. And we're gonna just go for pen damage. Enemy MVR going with what's left of his dive bomber squadrons. Alright, there's a fighter here, so I'm actually gonna just sacrifice this plane squadron because I don't want to waste time to clear the way for my actual killers, the dive bombers. Enemy MVR very easily makes mincemeat of my GK. As I said, poor vertical protection. Double citadel. This one's looking like it's going to be a loss, but can't really help that. Gonna get quite a bit of a lead with the last 3. They still sink a bit low. Hopefully my Colbert can dispatch that enemy Harugmo. That would simplify things quite a bit. Attacking the bow of the Yamato. Don't really know what he's shooting. Okay, apparently... I'm spotted, but I can't see it because the icon has been moved. Anyway, we're gonna attack the bow of the Yamato because even though it's saturated, we want to avoid that torpedo bulge. Moving quite fast. I'm gonna send my last torps into this Harugmo, actually. Okay, apparently the Yamato didn't die, which is not great for me. Hopefully he's still reloading. He is healing, however, so... he might actually have the chance to blast me. Not very angled, as you can see. But my turtleback and German armor are kind of protecting me from dying at the moment. Make a dive here, just for expediency. Okay, I'm definitely dead now, so I'm gonna attempt to take off a squadron. Torpedoes will impact and kill the Yamato, but ultimately my efforts are going to be in vain. A bit of a weird match. But showing off that in close quarters, you do actually have some durability. Able to withstand both the Yamato and the GK for quite some extended period of time, in spite of being in both secondary range and, well, point-blank melee range. Definitely showing there that if you muck with the aim even a little bit, the MVR can be unstable. but it is what it is. 119,000 damage nevertheless, with 12 torpedo hits, 17 bomb hits, 1 in-cap, 1 kill, 1 flood, 6 citadels, 1 solo capture, 43 secondary hits, 26 target hits, and with rockets that is, and 2 ships or planes intercepted by fighter. Team score-wise, not doing so hot, obviously attacking mostly the heavy targets, didn't get to participate in terms of much damage on the Hakuryu. And these guys obviously outfarmed my allies quite substantially, and my Shimakaze left his AA on, so even versus an MVR, leaving your AA on doesn't necessarily mean the carrier will kill you, but you will get killed by his allies. And the MVR with her fast planes is quite good at keeping you constantly spotted, let's just say. Anyhow, that'll have to be all for now. We got to see some quick brawly matches in the MVR, put on 2 extra matches. So going from 3 matches to 5 matches, so some pretty good practice time, but hopefully I'm gonna obtain some greater proficiency with this carrier over time and make sure I don't muck up any of those all too critical armor-piercing dive bomber drops with more play experience. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this brief overview of the MVR, not going super into an in-depth dive. It's really just a shallow first impressions view, but definitely a powerful carrier, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Cheers.